Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
Alrighty, welcome to my back to school night video. This would be the presentation that we would normally, that you would be watching, that I would be giving at back to school night. But since this year we're going to have to do everything virtually through a Google Meet, I thought it might be a good idea for you to view this at your leisure at home. And when we come to our virtual meeting for back to school night, we can turn it into a question and answer session, being that I probably imagine there's going to be a lot of questions being asked that evening. So let's get to it. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Tim Ahrens. I have been teaching for 23 years. The first 6 years of my career were spent teaching 5th grade down in Marin County. But then I transferred over to the middle school and then moved up to Loomis. So I've been teaching middle school math for the last 17 years. 7th grade math, the big idea is proportional reasoning. I would say that 7th grade tends to be a culmination of all the math that students have learned since kindergarten. Students start off with adding and subtracting and counting numbers, and they learned how to multiply and divide in 3rd and 4th grade and got into fraction operations. And in 7th grade, we're going to be taking all of that and bringing it all together in a problem-solving context. More than anything, I would say 7th grade math really falls into real-world types of situations. And proportional reasoning is sort of the foundation for all of that. For instance, you can see here some of these common formulas. Distance formula, if you travel 100 miles traveling at 50 miles per hour, how long will it take to get there? That's a proportional kind of relationship. Finding unit rates, simple interest, finding taxes or percent increases and decreases, all of this falls under the category of proportional reasoning. And all of this is the type of math that people use on a daily basis. So that is going to be the big idea, what we're going to be working on in 7th grade. And beyond that, 7th grade is when we introduce the 5D process, which is problem solving, doing it the CPM way. Okay, so let me introduce, or for some of you, this is an introduction. For others, you had it in 6th grade with Mr. Harbour. But the CPM philosophy really does emphasize collaboration, working together, and problem solving, solving problems together, doing problem solving together. I do understand that's going to be a little bit more complex since we're going to be doing everything virtually through Google Meets. It was always nice when students were sitting in groups in the classroom and they could work together and brainstorm ideas and together come up with a solution. And as we move forward with distance learning, we'll see if we can incorporate some elements of that into our Google meetings. It's a work in progress. We'll figure out how to make things like that work. But more than anything, we're going to focus on the problem-solving aspect of the CPM philosophy, because we can do that with distance learning as well as classroom learning. And a big part of that is what we call the 5D process. Now, I don't want you to be alarmed. This is not new math. This is just problem solving. But CPM has come up with a way for students to understand why we do what we do and what the best practices are for problem solving. So you read through a problem, first thing you need to do is pull out the essential information. What is important and what are they asking in this problem? Then you need to define your variables. What do we know? What are the parts or elements of the problem that are given, and what parts do we need to figure out? And we start off with a guess and check process, looking for patterns. Eventually, we create equations for the situation. And once we've decided on a process that we're going to use, which seems best for this particular problem, then we do the problem. We work through it. And embedded in the 5D process is a check mechanism, which is the decide. Does your answer make sense? Can you check it to be sure? And when you feel confident you've got the correct answer, then you declare your answer. So students are going to be introduced to this sometime mid-year, And it's going to become just a normal part of our problem-solving process. And they'll continue doing it through 8th grade and throughout high school whenever they solve problems. Here's an example of a problem that students might be asked to solve. For the end-of-year party, Mount Rose Middle School ordered 112 pizzas. There were 8 fewer veggie pieces. Let me actually do this. This is an important number, right? So there were 8 fewer veggie pizzas than there were pepperoni pizzas. And there were 3 times as many combo pizzas as there were pepperoni pizzas. You notice how the number of veggie pizzas and the number of combo pizzas are being compared to the number of pepperoni pizzas. So really our variable here, if we find out how many pepperoni pizzas there are, we can figure out the veggies by subtracting 8, and we can figure out the number of combos by multiplying it times 3. So students learn how to set up a table and do a guess and check process. So if you have 20 pepperoni pizzas, that means there must be 12 of the veggies, because that's 8 less than 20, and there must be 60 of the combo. And when you add those together, what are they supposed to add up to? They're supposed to add up to 112, but this only adds up to 92. So that means we get to adjust our numbers. And so students can solve these problems, which are relatively complex at first glance, but by organizing their information, they don't have to know algebraic reasoning to solve this problem. But we will eventually get to a point where we'll set up an algebraic expression and solve the expression for x. And once we solve for x, then we could just plug that number in, and that ends up being the 24, right? Then we know that x minus 8 must be 24 minus 8, and 3 times x must be 3 times 24, and that's how we get our answer. So this is where we're going to start with the 5D process, and we're just going to keep working on it until pretty much any word problem that students come upon, they'll have the basic framework to solve that problem and not be intimidated by the work. Expectations. Generally, my expectations for students when they come into my classroom is to have all of their materials ready, have all of their homework completed, and be ready to start the class period, ready to work. But of course, we're at home right now, so I still want people, when students join our virtual meeting, I want them to be ready. They should have all the materials that they need: pencils, spirals, any of the homework that we'd worked on the previous day, so that if they have any questions, they can ask and we can answer those questions. Most importantly, though, is my expectation is students are going to complete all of their assignments to the best of their ability. We need to work hard. Okay, it's just really, really important with middle school math, as things get more and more complex, that we give our best effort on everything that we do. I would recommend that students get started early on their work. A lot of times, I know with my kids during distance learning last spring, they knew they had the day to work, but they also knew they had, after they were done with their work, they had the day to play. And so we stressed the importance of getting the work done, get it done right. Don't rush through it, because then you're just going to end up having to go back over everything and do it over again. And who wants to spend time doing that? But get the work done early so that the rest of the day you can enjoy without having to have that weight on your shoulders of incomplete work. So what will we be assigning? I do assign homework. I assign it regularly after every single lesson. The homework in CPM is really, really important. It is called review and preview, and they typically will ask 6 questions. Within those 6 questions, there might be an A, B, C kind of an element. So there's often more than just 6 problems that they're solving for the homework, but there are 6 main idea problems. And usually a couple of those problems have to do with the lesson that we had just learned that day. So it gives them a chance to practice immediately the new concepts that they have learned. But some of the concepts, or some of the problems in the homework, are from concepts that we'd learned earlier in the chapter, because until we take the summative assessment at the end of the chapter, we don't want to lose track of any of those skills that we've been learning along the way. So we want to keep practicing and practicing. And then there's usually a couple of problems that might be from earlier in the year or maybe even from 6th grade, where we haven't actually worked on those concepts yet, but we're about ready to get into a lesson where a firm understanding of a previously learned concept is essential for having success with that future lesson. So CPM likes to throw some of those types of problems into the homework just to make sure that people are ready for when the lesson comes along. If you're not doing your homework on a regular basis, you're missing out on all of this extra review that is so important for learning. So we want to make sure we stay on top of our homework on a daily basis. Speaking of homework, this is how we're going to be doing homework. If you go to my website, which you can find linked on Aries and on our school website, you can go up to this menu button, and there's a drop down, and you can see what the homework is on any given day. Just click on that homework link, and it'll bring you up to my calendar. And what I do typically is that at the beginning of the week, I'll put in the homework for the entire week, and students can write all this in their planner so they don't have to keep coming back and checking it. But it also gives you the opportunity to say, hey, have you got your homework done? And student says, I'm not sure if we have homework. And you can always look on the calendar and verify, oh yes, today's date, right here it is. We've got this for the homework. Homework can be found in our online book. So you can click on the CPM online textbook. Students, by the time we get to back to school night, should have already logged in and gotten their online book. I've already put out a tutorial for that, for how they could enroll in their online book. The online book, you just sign in with Google, and you click on the Core Connections 2 book, which is the 7th grade book, and it brings you to this menu of options, and whatever today's lesson is, they'll just click on that lesson. Now here's an example of homework from the review preview. This particular homework assignment, if you're reading through it and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to do, there is a homework help link. And most of these problems have a homework help link. Now, let me tell you what the homework help link does. Looking at it negatively, a lot of times it will lead students to the answer. However, if it's used in a positive way, it can build confidence with the student, or it can help the student, reminding them of the procedures that are necessary to solve that particular problem. Now, one thing I like about the homework help is it reminds me of a professor that I had back when I was many, many years ago when I was in college and I was taking an algebra class in college. And, you know, we had to buy our textbooks, and he recommended that we buy the supplemental answers book. So when we were doing our homework, when I was doing my homework, if I came across a problem and I wasn't quite sure if I was doing it the right way, I would go peek in the answer book. And if I was getting the answer correct, I would be like, great, I'm understanding this, and that would boost my confidence. And if I was not getting it correct, then I could go and review the worked out solutions for a problem and figure out, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I would go ahead and jump into the homework and complete the rest of it. And he stated, students who buy this supplemental answers book tend to get A's in my class. And I'm thinking about that, thinking, well, yeah, if they've got all the answers. But then once I started taking the course, I realized homework wasn't included in the grade. Our grade was a midterm and a final exam, or actually they probably did have unit exams along the way in that class. But still, college homework isn't graded. It was just on the test. So students who took advantage of that homework help learned the material and had more success on their tests. And so that's what CPM provides for our students. It's an opportunity to build your confidence so that you know what you're doing, or that this can help you. And of course, I'm always going to be available through Google Meet and during our scheduled blocks to answer any questions that students have. I'll also have office hours available after lunch. So if someone wants to talk to me just one-on-one, they can reach me that way as well. The M&Ms, also known as math notes, are the way that CPM gets our formulas and our vocabulary terms to the students. Now, Like I said, most of the students had CPM in 6th grade, so they know that it's more activity-based. It's more problem-solving. Back in the day, we would provide students with vocabulary and formulas, walk them through a couple of example problems, and then give them 20 more problems to solve, and through repetition would learn and memorize the process. But that's not the way that CPM likes to have students learn. CPM likes to have students go through and work through the problem-solving process. And it can be confusing at times, but that's an essential part of learning, that productive struggle where you're not quite sure what to do, and so your brain is trying to figure things out. And once you figure it out, you are the one who created meaning in the math. You weren't told it and told to memorize it. You actually figured something out. And that embeds in the mind, in the brain, for long-term learning. And so what the M&Ms are is a day or two after we've worked on a problem, learning a new concept. Now is the time when we can get this into your math notes, and you can always have it there to go back and reference if you ever in a later lesson or a homework assignment or studying in the study guide, getting ready for a test, you might want to go back and look through the process. Like here, this is the process for finding the mean. Now, what I remember when I used to teach the old way is a lot of times I would teach students vocabulary terms and I would teach them formulas. No, please don't come in. Well, nothing like having the principal come and have a conversation with you when you're in the middle of recording. But as I was saying, oftentimes I would present a formula and vocabulary, and students would just be copying it down, but didn't have any idea what it meant while they were writing it down. And later they would figure things out because we would learn about it in the lesson. But with CPM, now when it comes time to write down these notes, they know exactly what it is that we're talking about. It all makes sense, and they can paraphrase a few things, word it the way that makes most sense to them, and it is effective. This is a part of the homework that is assigned regularly. Not every single homework assignment has the M&Ms, but often they do. And the nice thing about it is there's no problems to solve with the M&Ms. It's simply a matter of copying things down. Okay, so what types of assessments do we do in 7th grade math? We have formative assessments and we have summative assessments. The formative assessments are come in two different varieties. One of them is a check for understanding, which comes at the end of a lesson. And I don't necessarily do them with every lesson, but I do them with most. And this is what it would look like. It's an online Google form where students would type in their name, pick their teacher, and then they would scroll down and there'd be a problem presented. And students would work out the problem and then choose what the best answer is. Let's see if I can figure. They would choose what the best answer is, and then they would submit once they got to the end, and then I get to see how well they're understanding that concept. Now, this is not graded. It's just information for both me and for the individual student. And what I do when I look at the spreadsheet that has all of the 7th graders' scores for the check for understanding, I look to see how many of them are getting 4 out of 4 or 3 out of 4. If everybody's doing great, I feel very confident. They should feel confident. We'll move on to the next concept. If people are really struggling, then I know we need to slow down and make sure we cover this a little bit more. I do realize that with the homework, with the built-in review, just because I taught it today doesn't mean it's the last time we're going to discuss it. It's going to keep popping up in the homework, but still, I'm going to make sure that I reteach that concept regularly. We also have weekly assessments, which are a little bit different from the check for understanding because it's not going to just have problems from that one particular day's lesson, but maybe 3 or 4 lessons that we were learning throughout the week. And these tend to be on Fridays. And so an example of that would be like this D equals RT, that's the distance formula, where this particular one is worth 4 points. Now, the difference between this and the check for understanding was the check for understanding is not going to go into the grade book. It's just information. But our weekly assessments will go into the grade book. Notice this is only worth 4 points. It's not going to greatly affect the overall grade. but it'll be that second layer of how well are we learning these concepts. And the fact that it's worth a few points generally is a pretty good motivator for students to do their best on it. Then we have chapter tests. These are the summative assessments, and these are worth 100 points. And so there's generally going to be more of these on our online tests. Like this particular one from chapter 7 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different problems. And I know these say they're worth 2 points, but that means that the entire score is going to be out of 20, and I'm just going to find the percent. So if someone got 16 out of 20, then I'm going to write that in as 80 out of 100 in the grade book. So that's how we're going to be doing assessments. It's not going to be paper pencil. Students are going to have access to this, and I try to be as flexible as I can with students. You know, if someone needs just a little bit more time to complete the test, it's not like we're in the classroom where they have until the bell rings to finish the test. It's a little bit more open with the time that it will take to complete the tests. Okay, so those assessments, the chapter tests and the weekly assessments, do account for 100% of the grade. The homework and the check for understanding are not included in the grade. I don't want homework to be a stressful situation for students where they've just learned a concept and they have to worry about getting it correct or not. I want them to feel like they can take a chance. They should show their work. It's okay to make mistakes on the homework, because we will go through and check all of the answers and make corrections to those mistakes, and that's a part of the learning process. And once again, the checks for understanding is just information. It's not going to be points. Unfortunately, students ask this every single year. We don't have extra credit. I'm not going to make up extra assignments for students to help boost their grade. What I would rather students do, and this is really better than extra credit, is I allow students to retake a test or an assessment. The first score is in the book. So let's say a student who's used to being like an A-level student, B plus A minus level, 90% is an A minus. That's the threshold between B plus and A minus. Well, if you get 75% on a test, that's a C. Many of those students should be like, no, I want to raise my grade. So I encourage them, go back, look through their study guides, look through their notes, figure out which problems they were making mistakes on, and then when they feel like they're ready, as long as it's before we've taken the next chapter test, which is usually 2 to 3 weeks later, they can retake it, and I'll give them the average of the two scores. So if you think 75 on the first test and then 100 when they retake it, I'll average those two out, and that averages to 87.5. So they earned 12.5 bonus points by retaking a test. That's a pretty good extra credit assignment if you ask me. So no, we will not be giving out extra credit assignments, but retaking tests, it's a win-win for everyone. It's a way to boost a student's grade. It's also a way for me to see that the student is going that extra mile to try and learn some concepts that maybe they weren't quite getting right when they first took the chapter test, but then after doing the retake, then they feel more confident about that work and we can move forward. Okay, so now this is the last part of the lesson, and I'm going to try and wrap this up in a couple of minutes. I'd like to present this to parents just so they kind of get an understanding of what students are dealing with and how their natural ability and their effort play a role in the overall grade that they're going to get in 7th grade math. Now, these are two different spectrums. The ability spectrum, we've got some students who just understand math. They're really, really good at it. And the first time they're taught something, they master it. And even sometimes they understand concepts when it hasn't been taught. It just makes sense to them. And then, unfortunately, you have students that really, really struggle with math. The numbers just don't make sense. And no matter how many times they get taught something, they feel like they're struggling to remember those things. Most students fall somewhere in the middle. So that's where we've got this halfway point. Some are below the halfway point, some are above average. Very few people ever go into the 1 or the 0 range. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use those numbers down here. As far as effort is concerned, this is the one that all students have control over. While you have no control over your God-given ability to do math, you certainly have control over the amount of effort you put into it. And so if we take a look at these three categories, this is the category for students that really struggle a lot with math. If someone struggles with math and they put no effort into it, won't do their homework, rarely show up for daily meetings, aren't completing the assignments, you really shouldn't expect anything above an F for that kind of effort. Students who struggle and they're kind of hit or miss with their effort, sometimes they find a way to pull out a passing grade, but they still often fit into that F range. But I've been teaching for 23 years, and I've taught lots of students who struggled greatly with their math, but worked really, really hard, retaking tests, working with me, with private tutoring whenever possible, and we almost always were able to get their grade up into the C range. Sometimes it would slip into the D range because, you know, the math does get hard sometimes. But I really firmly believe no matter what your ability level is, if you give me your best effort, doing your homework on a regular basis, retaking tests whenever you get a grade that's below a certain point, like anything below 70%, just plan on retaking it, I can almost guarantee that student's going to get a C in my math class. Then you take the average ability students. Take someone with average ability that doesn't want to do any work, well, they're going to be struggling. You know, they might get a D out of it, but more often than not, it's probably going to be a low D to an F kind of a grade. You take someone with average ability that's hit or miss with their work, those students can often pull out a C. Often they're in the D range. A lot of times, you know, toward the end of the semester, they're in the D range and they do a little bit of test retaking and boosting that grade to get it up into the C range. And then you take your average student who gives 100% effort all the time. They're almost always going to be in the B range, possibly drifting into the C range. And then you got your high level students. We have a few students every single year that are really good at math, but just don't want to do any of the work. And, you know, they're saying, well, I understand it. I don't need to do the homework. But those students seldom ever get A's. They're, you know, depending on their ability level, they could get a B, or, you know, if they really slack off when things get really challenging toward the end of the year because the concepts are starting to get really complicated, you might see their grade dip down to the C or D range. High-level students that are hit or miss generally are in the A to B range, and no surprises, high-level students with high amount of effort almost always get A's in my classes. So, just something to be aware of. Someone's ability level is out of their control. However, their amount of effort that they give is all 100% within their control. And while I'll say that you cannot affect your ability level, I have actually seen students at the beginning of 7th grade make some growth because their effort was solid, 100% effort all the time. And by the time they completed 8th grade, they were moving their ability level up, getting ready for high school. And very happy results for those students. So as we start in 7th grade and we work through 7th grade and 8th grade, be aware of this effort. Are we going to be ones with our effort and give solid effort every single day? Or are we going to be something a little bit less than that? It absolutely affects our learning and affects our grades. Alrighty, so that wraps up my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to call or email me. Email's better because I can answer those from home, but I don't get access to my voicemail on the phone in the classroom until I come into the classroom. So email is always best. And of course, we'll have back to school night for a question and answer session. So thank you very much for listening to this video. Less than 30 minutes. Very good. I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark,